In the quiet, softly lit corridors of St. Mary's Hospital, Nurse Clara Bennett moved with practiced ease. She had been working at the hospital for nearly 6 years, and her days blended into nights seamlessly. Her life revolved around caring for others, patients who needed help, guidance, or simply a kind word to make their stay less lonely. But among all the faces she encountered, one stood out in particular: Mr. Alexander Hartwell. Alexander was unlike any other patient Clara had ever cared for. He lay motionless in his bed, his chest rising and falling rhythmically thanks to the machines that monitored his every breath. A car accident 3 months earlier had left him comatose, trapped in a state between consciousness and oblivion. His room, however, told a different story. It wasn't just another sterile hospital space, it was filled with an air of mystery. Fresh flowers adorned the bedside table, their vibrant colors contrasting sharply with the pale walls. Expensive chocolates wrapped in golden foil sat untouched on a tray near the window. And then there were the cards, dozens of them, each bearing elegant handwriting and signed by names Clara didn't recognize. Despite the luxury surrounding him, Alexander remained silent, unresponsive, and seemingly unaware of the world around him. Yet something about him drew Clara in. Perhaps it was the way his face retained a peaceful expression even in sleep. Or maybe it was the faint smile that occasionally flickered across his lips as though he were dreaming pleasant dreams. Whatever it was, Clara found herself lingering in his room longer than necessary during her shifts. At first, she spoke to him out of habit. Nurses often talked to comatose patients, hoping that their voices might somehow reach through the fog of unconsciousness. "Good morning, Mr. Hartwell," she'd say brightly, adjusting his blankets or checking his IV drip. "It's going to be a sunny day today. I hope you can feel it." Over time, though, these polite greetings evolved into something deeper. Clara began sharing pieces of her own life with him, treating him like a confidant despite knowing he couldn't respond. On slow nights when the hospital was eerily quiet, Clara would pull up a chair beside his bed and talk freely. She told him about her daughter Lily, who was 8 years old and full of boundless energy. "She loves drawing," Clara said one evening, holding Alexander's hand gently. "Every day she brings me a new picture. Sometimes it's a house, sometimes it's a cat, and sometimes it's, well, honestly, I'm not sure what it is." She chuckled softly, glancing at Alexander's still form. "But I hang them, all on our fridge anyway. They remind me that no matter how hard things get, there's always beauty somewhere." Clara also opened up about her struggles. As a single mother working long hours at the hospital, she often felt stretched thin. Some days, exhaustion weighed so heavily on her shoulders that she wondered if she could keep going. "You probably think I'm silly for complaining," she admitted once, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "After all, you're the one lying here unable to move. But sometimes, life feels overwhelming, you know? Like everything is piling up and there's no end in sight." As the weeks passed, Clara grew bolder in her confessions. One rainy night, when the sound of droplets tapping against the window seemed to echo her melancholy, she leaned closer to Alexander. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to start over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To leave behind all the stress and expectations and just be free?" She paused, staring at his peaceful face. "If you were awake, I think I'd tell you more. Maybe I'd even ask you to run away with me, to some place where no one knows us and we could start fresh." Though Clara believed her words fell on deaf ears, they weren't entirely lost. Unknown to her, Alexander occasionally drifted between states of awareness. While he couldn't open his eyes or speak, fragments of her voice reached him, weaving themselves into his subconscious. Her stories became a lifeline, grounding him amidst the chaos of his condition. The warmth of her tone, the vulnerability in her words, it all resonated deeply within him, pulling him closer to the surface of consciousness. Outside the hospital, Alexander's absence had sparked concern among those who knew him. He was a man of immense wealth and influence, though few people at St. Mary's realized this. To them, he was simply a patient, a name on a chart, a body occupying a bed. His family and business associates scrambled to locate him, offering substantial rewards for information while keeping his identity tightly under wraps. They feared public attention would complicate his recovery or expose him to unwanted scrutiny. For now, however, Clara remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beyond the hospital walls. To her, Alexander was just a man, a quiet, enigmatic figure who inspired her to share parts of herself she'd never revealed to anyone else. Little did she know, her whispered confessions were planting seeds that would soon blossom into something extraordinary. Clara's nightly visits to Alexander's room became a ritual she looked forward to, even though she couldn't explain why. There was something comforting about the way his presence, silent and still, seemed to listen without judgment. Over time, her confessions grew more personal, more raw. She found herself pouring out emotions she had buried deep inside, things she hadn't dared to share with anyone else, not even her closest friends. One particularly grueling night after an exhausting shift where everything seemed to go wrong, Clara sank into the chair beside Alexander's bed. Her feet ached, her head throbbed, and her heart felt heavier than usual. "Today was hard," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I lost a patient today, a little boy, no older than Lily." Her hands clenched tightly around the edge of the chair as tears welled up in her eyes. "I did everything I could, but it wasn't enough. His parents, they cried so much, and now all I can think about is how fragile life is, how unfair." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I know I shouldn't take it personally. It's not my fault, but sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough, if I'm strong enough for this job." Her gaze drifted to Alexander's face, peaceful and serene despite the chaos swirling around him. "You probably think I'm being ridiculous. You're the one lying here, fighting for your life. And here I am complaining about my day. But talking to you, it helps. It makes me feel like someone understands." As the hours ticked by, Clara continued speaking, her words flowing freely as though a dam had burst inside her. She talked about her childhood, growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. She described her late husband, Mark, who had been her high school sweetheart. "He was kind," she said softly, her fingers tracing patterns on the blanket covering Alexander's legs. "He always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. But then he got sick, and just like that..." She snapped her fingers, the sound sharp against the quiet hum of the machines. "He was gone, and suddenly I was alone, with Lily, bills, and a future I wasn't ready for." Her voice cracked, and she wiped at her cheeks, embarrassed by the tears streaming down her face. "Sometimes I wish I could turn back time, go back to when things were simpler, when I didn't have to worry about making ends meet or whether I'm raising Lily right. But then I remember, I wouldn't trade her for anything. She's my light, you know? Even on the darkest days, she reminds me why I keep going." Clara leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. Her tone shifted, becoming softer, almost hesitant. "But there are moments, late at night when Lily's asleep and the house is quiet. I let myself imagine what it would be like to have someone again. Not because I need saving or because I'm lonely, but because it would be nice to share the load. To have someone who sees me, not just as a nurse or a mom, but as a person. Someone who listens the way I listen to you." She glanced at Alexander, half expecting him to respond, though she knew better. Instead, his chest rose and fell steadily, his expression unchanged. For a moment, she felt foolish for saying such things aloud. What was the point of confessing her deepest desires to a man who couldn't hear her? But then she shook her head, dismissing the thought. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "At least I'm honest with myself." What Clara didn't realize was that Alexander wasn't entirely unreachable. Beneath the surface of his comatose state, fragments of her voice pierced through the haze. Though he couldn't open his eyes or move his body, he occasionally experienced flashes of awareness. In those fleeting moments, he heard snippets of her stories, the laughter, the pain, the longing, and they anchored him to reality. Her words became a lifeline, pulling him closer to consciousness with each passing day. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, the search for Alexander Hartwell intensified. His disappearance had sent shockwaves through his family and business empire. Board meetings were held in hushed tones, and private investigators worked tirelessly to track him down. Yet despite their efforts, no one suspected that the billionaire lay unconscious in a modest hospital room, surrounded by flowers and chocolates sent by people who didn't know his whereabouts. Back in the hospital, Clara remained oblivious to the frenzy unfolding beyond its walls. To her, Alexander was simply a patient, a man whose silence invited her to bare her soul. One evening, as she adjusted his blankets, she noticed something unusual. His hand twitched ever so slightly, beneath hers. Startled, she froze, staring at his fingers. Had she imagined it? She waited, holding her breath, but nothing else happened. Shaking her head, she chalked it up to fatigue and continued her routine. But the next night it happened again. This time, his eyelids fluttered faintly, as though he were trying to wake up. Clara's heart raced as she pressed the call button for the nurse's station. Within minutes, doctors rushed into the room, their faces a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism. They performed a series of tests, shining lights in his eyes, checking his reflexes, and monitoring his brain activity. The results were astonishing. Alexander was showing signs of improvement. For Clara, the news brought a mix of relief and apprehension. On one hand, she was thrilled that he might awaken and recover fully. On the other hand, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. Would he remember her? Would he recall the countless hours she'd spent talking to him, sharing pieces of her heart? And what would happen when he returned to his real life, whatever that entailed? Despite her worries, Clara stayed by his side, determined to see him through this final stage of his recovery. She read to him from books, played soft music, and continued speaking to him as though nothing had changed. Each visit ended with the same heartfelt plea. "Come back to us, Mr. Hartwell. We're waiting. For you." Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, Alexander began to emerge from the shadows of his coma. His movements grew stronger, his responses more deliberate. Then, one stormy evening, as lightning illuminated the dark sky, Clara sat beside him reading aloud from a collection of poems. Suddenly, his fingers curled around hers, weak but unmistakable. Startled, she dropped the book and called for help once more. When Alexander finally opened his eyes days later, the world around him came into focus slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. He blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, disoriented but alive. His gaze landed on Clara, who stood beside his bed, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with great effort, Alexander managed to form two words, his voice hoarse and barely audible. "Thank you." In that instant, Clara realized that whatever connection had formed between them during his coma wasn't lost. It had only just begun. When Alexander Hartwell finally opened his eyes, it felt like a miracle, not just for Clara, but for everyone at St. Mary's Hospital who had cared for him during those long, uncertain months. Yet no one was more stunned than Clara herself. She had spent countless hours talking to him, sharing her thoughts, fears, and dreams, all while believing he couldn't hear her. Now, as she stood beside his bed, watching him blink slowly and take in his surroundings, she struggled to process the enormity of what was happening. The room was eerily quiet except for the steady beeping of the monitors tracking his vitals. Clara's hands trembled as she reached out to adjust the blanket covering him, unsure of what to say or do. "Mr. Hartwell?" she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze shifted toward her, unfocused at first, but gradually, sharpening as recognition dawned. He didn't smile, nor did he speak immediately. Instead, he simply looked at her, his expression unreadable yet oddly comforting. For Clara, that moment stretched into eternity. Part of her wanted to cry with relief, while another part braced itself for disappointment. What if he didn't remember anything? What if the bond she thought they shared existed only in her imagination? Her mind raced with questions, but she forced herself to stay calm. "You're awake," she managed to say, her tone light despite the storm brewing inside. "We've been waiting for this." Alexander's lips parted slightly, and though his voice was weak and raspy, he spoke two words that sent shivers down Clara's spine. "Thank you." The gratitude in his tone was unmistakable, and it struck her deeply. How could he possibly know how much she had done for him? Or was he thanking her for something else entirely, something she hadn't realized until now? Over the next few days, Alexander's recovery progressed steadily. Doctors marveled at his resilience, noting that his brain activity showed remarkable improvement. Physically, he remained frail, but mentally, he seemed lucid and aware. Clara continued visiting him regularly, though their interactions were different now. Gone were the monologues she used to deliver. Instead, their conversations became tentative, exchanges filled with pauses and unspoken emotions. One afternoon, as Clara adjusted his pillows, Alexander cleared his throat, a sound so deliberate that it caught her attention immediately. "Clara," he said, his voice stronger than before. She turned to face him, startled by the way he said her name, as if he'd practiced it in his mind countless times. "I remember," he continued haltingly. "Your voice. You talked to me. A lot." Her cheeks flushed, and she instinctively looked away, embarrassed by the admission. I didn't think you could hear me," she stammered. "I mean, I hoped you could, but—" She trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. To her surprise, Alexander smiled faintly. "I heard you," he said, his gaze steady. "Not everything, not clearly, but enough." He paused, as if gathering strength. "Enough to know you helped me hold on." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had always believed in the power of human connection, even in the most unlikely circumstances, but hearing those words from Alexander left her speechless. For months she had treated him like any other patient, albeit with extra care and compassion. But now, standing here, she realized their relationship had transcended the boundaries of nurse and patient. Something deeper had formed, a bond forged in vulnerability and trust. As Alexander grew stronger, Clara began noticing subtle changes in his demeanor. He asked thoughtful questions about her life, her daughter Lily, and the challenges she faced as a single mother. It was almost as if he were piecing together fragments of her stories, trying to understand the woman behind the confessions. In turn, Clara found herself curious about him. Who was Alexander Hartwell beyond the hospital walls? Why had so many people sent flowers and gifts without ever revealing their identities? And why did his family seem absent from his bedside? Despite her growing curiosity, Clara refrained from prying. After all, he was still recovering, and she didn't want to overwhelm him with questions. But fate had other plans. One evening, as Clara prepared to leave after her shift, a commotion erupted outside Alexander's room. Nurses hurried past, whispering urgently, and moments later a group of sharply dressed individuals entered the ward. They carried themselves with an air of authority, their polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. At first, Clara assumed they were relatives or friends coming to see Alexander. But when one of them introduced himself as Mr. Hartwell's personal assistant, her stomach dropped. Personal assistant? The term sounded formal, almost corporate, and it made her uneasy. As the man stepped forward to greet Alexander, Clara hovered near the doorway, torn between staying and leaving. Before she could decide, Alexander caught her eye and gestured for her to come closer. "This is Clara Bennett," he said, his voice firm despite his weakened state. "She's been taking care of me since I arrived." His words carried weight, and the group turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled skepticism. Clara felt exposed under their scrutiny, acutely aware of her scrubs and tired appearance compared to their tailored suits and designer accessories. "Ms. Bennett," the assistant said politely, extending a hand. "We owe you a great deal of gratitude for your dedication to Mr. Hartwell's care." His tone was professional, but there was an undercurrent of caution, as if he were sizing her up. Clara nodded awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. Thankfully, Alexander intervened. "Clara has been invaluable," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "I wouldn't be here without her." The statement hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Clara felt a lump rise in her throat, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. Yet, Amidst the warmth of his praise, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was unfolding, something she wasn't fully prepared for. Over the following days, Clara learned bits and pieces about Alexander's life outside the hospital. Through snippets of conversation and observations, she discovered that he was far from ordinary. The flowers and chocolates weren't random gestures. They were tokens from influential figures in his orbit: business partners, politicians, and celebrities. Even his medical bills were handled discreetly, paid in full by accounts managed by a team of accountants. It was clear that Alexander Hartwell wasn't just a wealthy man. He was a titan of industry, someone whose name commanded respect, and, perhaps envy, in certain circles. Yet none of this seemed to matter to Alexander himself. Despite his newfound ability to communicate, he remained humble and introspective, often steering conversations back to Clara. He asked about lilies. Drawings complimented Clara's resilience and expressed admiration for her unwavering kindness. Each interaction deepened their connection, making Clara feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. But as the days passed, reality began creeping in. Clara couldn't ignore the stark differences between their worlds. While she juggled double shifts and worried about affording groceries, Alexander lived in a realm where such concerns were inconsequential. The disparity weighed heavily on her, planting seeds of doubt in her mind. Could their bond survive once Alexander returned to his old life? Would he forget about her once surrounded by luxury and privilege? One evening, as Clara sat beside Alexander's bed, she voiced her fears. "What happens when you leave here?" she asked quietly, staring at her hands. "When you go back to your life, the one you had before the accident?" Alexander's expression softened, and he reached out to place a reassuring hand over hers. "My life isn't going anywhere," he said gently. "But neither are you, from my thoughts at least." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Whatever comes next, I don't want to lose what we've built here. You've given me more than anyone else ever has. Don't doubt that." His words brought tears to Clara's eyes, but they also ignited a spark of hope within her. Perhaps love, or whatever this was between them, didn't have to conform to societal expectations. Maybe it could thrive in its own unique way, bridging the gap between two vastly different worlds. And so, as Alexander continued regaining his strength, Clara allowed herself to dream again, not of fairy tales or grand gestures, but of a future where authenticity mattered more than appearances. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: the man lying in that hospital bed had changed her life forever, and she would carry the lessons of their journey with her always. As Alexander Hartwell regained his strength, the reality of his true identity began to unfold in ways Clara hadn't anticipated. The group of sharply dressed individuals who had visited him earlier returned more frequently, bringing with them stacks of documents, tablets, and phones that buzzed incessantly. Clara noticed how their presence transformed the atmosphere of the hospital room. What was once a quiet sanctuary now felt like the center of a whirlwind, with people constantly moving in and out, speaking in hushed yet urgent tones. At first, Clara tried to stay out of the way, focusing on her duties as a nurse while keeping her distance from the chaos. But it wasn't long before she realized that avoiding the situation entirely was impossible. One afternoon, as she entered Alexander's room with a tray of medication, she overheard snippets of conversation between him and his assistant. Words like board meeting, stock prices, and public relations floated through the air, leaving Clara bewildered. She had never imagined that the man lying in the hospital bed was anything more than an ordinary patient. Now it seemed he was far from ordinary. What truly shook Clara, however, came later that evening when Alexander finally revealed the truth. After dismissing his team for the night, he motioned for Clara to sit beside him. His expression was serious, almost apologetic, as if he were bracing himself for her reaction. "Clara," he began, his voice steady but tinged with hesitation, "there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Okay," she replied cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "I'm not just a regular person." he continued, choosing his words carefully. Before the accident, I ran a company, a very large one. Some people call me a billionaire. He paused, searching her face for any sign of judgment or disbelief. I didn't want to burden you with this while I was recovering, but now that I'm getting better, I think it's important, you know. For a moment, Clara simply stared at him, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. Billionaire? The word echoed in her head, surreal and almost comical. How could the man who lay comatose for months, the same man she had confided in so freely, be one of the wealthiest individuals in the world? It felt like something out of a movie, a story too fantastical to be real. But as the initial shock wore off, Clara found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she felt foolish for not recognizing the signs earlier, the endless stream of expensive gifts, the mysterious visitors, the aura of importance that surrounded him even in his weakened state. On the other hand, she couldn't help but feel betrayed, not because Alexander had lied, but because the revelation highlighted the vast chasm between their worlds. You must think I'm ridiculous, she said after a long silence, her voice tinged with self-deprecation. All those things I told you, my struggles, my dreams, they probably sound so trivial compared to your life. Alexander's response was immediate and emphatic. No, he said firmly, reaching out to take her hand. They don't. In fact, they're the opposite of trivial. Your honesty, your vulnerability, that's what kept me going during the darkest moments. You made me see the value of simplicity, of human connection, in a way I'd forgotten. His words brought tears to Clara's eyes, but they also stirred a flicker of hope within her. Perhaps their differences weren't insurmountable. Perhaps, instead of driving them apart, these revelations could deepen their understanding of each other. Still, the outside world wasn't as forgiving. As news of Alexander's recovery spread, whispers turned into headlines. Reporters camped outside the hospital, eager to catch a glimpse of the billionaire who had mysteriously vanished months ago. Speculation ran rampant, with tabloids painting wild scenarios about his disappearance and subsequent reappearance. Amidst the frenzy, Clara became an unwitting target of attention. Photographers snapped pictures of her entering and exiting the hospital, and gossip columns speculated about her role in Alexander's life. The scrutiny took a toll on Clara. She had always been a private person, content to live her life away from the spotlight. Now she found herself thrust into a world where every move she made was analyzed and dissected. Critics questioned her motives, accusing her of seeking fame or fortune by cozying up to a wealthy patient. Friends and colleagues, though supportive, couldn't hide their curiosity, peppering her with questions she didn't know how to answer. Through it all, Alexander remained steadfast. Determined to shield Clara from the negativity, he instructed his team to handle the media carefully, issuing statements that emphasized her professionalism and dedication as a nurse. He also took steps to address the rumors directly, inviting Clara to join him for dinner once he was discharged from the hospital. It was a bold move, one that signaled his intention to stand by her side regardless of public opinion. The evening of the dinner arrived, and Clara approached it with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Alexander had arranged everything meticulously, ensuring that the setting would be intimate and free from prying eyes. Instead of a luxurious restaurant, he chose a secluded park overlooking the city skyline. Tables adorned with candles and fresh flowers were set up under twinkling string lights, creating an ambiance that was both romantic and serene. When Clara arrived, dressed in a simple yet elegant dress borrowed from a friend, she was struck by the effort Alexander had put into making the evening special. He greeted her warmly, his smile putting her at ease. I wanted tonight to be about us, he explained as they sat down. No distractions, no interruptions, just two people enjoying each other's company. Over the course of the meal, they talked openly about their lives, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Alexander shared stories about the pressures of wealth and success, admitting that he often felt isolated despite being surrounded by people. Money doesn't solve everything, he said with a wry smile. Sometimes it creates more problems than it solves. In turn, Clara spoke candidly about her own struggles, balancing work and motherhood, dealing with societal expectations, and navigating the challenges of single parenthood. She confessed that she sometimes worried about whether she was enough for Lily, for herself, and now perhaps for him. Alexander listened intently, his gaze never wavering. "You are enough, Clara," he said softly. "More than enough. Don't ever doubt that." By the end of the evening, Clara felt a renewed sense of clarity. While their worlds were undeniably different, she realized that love, or whatever this connection was, didn't have to conform to conventional standards. It could exist in its own unique form, built on mutual respect, trust, and a willingness to embrace imperfections. As they walked back to the car, hand in hand, Clara allowed herself to dream again, not of fairy tales or grand gestures, but of a future where authenticity mattered more than appearances. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. Alexander Hartwell had changed her life forever, and she was ready to face whatever came next, together. As days turned into weeks, Alexander and Clara's relationship continued to grow, but the challenges they faced became more pronounced. The media frenzy surrounding Alexander's recovery showed no signs of dying down. Reporters hounded them wherever they went, snapping photos and speculating about the nature of their bond. Headlines ranged from curious, billionaire's mystery nurse love story or publicity stunt, to cruel, gold digger alert, small-town nurse sets sights on wealthy patient. Clara found herself at the center of a storm she had never asked for, and it weighed heavily on her. At first, she tried to ignore the noise, focusing instead on her work and spending time with Lily. But the constant scrutiny made it difficult to move freely. Simple tasks like grocery shopping or taking Lily to the park became daunting endeavors, as strangers either stared at her or whispered behind her back. Even her colleagues at the hospital began treating her differently, some with admiration, others with thinly veiled jealousy. It was as if her identity had been reduced to a single narrative: the nurse who caught a billionaire. Clara's insecurities grew alongside the chaos. She couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong in Alexander's world, a realm filled with private jets, luxury penthouses, and high-stakes business deals. Who was she, a single mother working double shifts just to make ends meet, to stand beside someone like him? These doubts gnawed at her, threatening to unravel the fragile trust they had built. Alexander, however, refused to let the distance between their worlds tear them apart. He recognized the toll the media circus was taking on Clara and took deliberate steps to protect her. He arranged for security detail to accompany her whenever she left the house, ensuring her safety while giving her a sense of normalcy. He also worked closely with his PR team to issue statements defending their relationship, emphasizing that Clara was not some opportunistic gold digger, but a kind-hearted woman who had selflessly cared for him during his darkest hours. Despite these efforts, Clara struggled to reconcile her old life with the new reality unfolding before her eyes. One evening, after an exhausting day at work, followed by another round of intrusive questions from reporters, she broke down in tears. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by frustration and exhaustion. When Alexander arrived later that night, he found her sitting quietly, staring out the window with a faraway look in her eyes. "Clara," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "Talk to me." She hesitated, unsure of how to articulate the storm raging inside her. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "I don't know how much longer I can do this, Alexander. This life. People are watching my every move, judging everything I say or do. They don't see me. They only see what they want to believe. And honestly, sometimes I wonder if they're right. Am I fooling myself into thinking we can actually make this work?" Alexander's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "You're not fooling yourself," he said firmly. "We're building something real here, Clara, something rare. Yes, our worlds are different, but that doesn't mean they can't overlap. I'm not asking you to change who you are or fit into some mold created by society. I love you because you're exactly who you are." His words brought tears to her eyes, but they also reignited a flicker of determination within her. Maybe she couldn't control what others thought or said, but she could choose how she responded. Slowly, she began finding ways to adapt, to navigate the complexities of Alexander's world without losing sight of her own values. One of the biggest hurdles came when Alexander invited Clara and Lily to spend a weekend at his family estate. Located on sprawling grounds overlooking a serene lake, the property was breathtakingly beautiful, but intimidatingly grand. As Clara stepped out of the car, clutching Lily's hand tightly, she felt out of place among the towering columns and manicured gardens. Inside, the opulence only intensified. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with priceless art. To make matters worse, Alexander's family greeted them with polite but guarded expressions. His parents, elegant and distinguished, exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their skepticism. His younger sister, though warmer, seemed equally curious about the woman who had captured her brother's heart. Over dinner that evening, conversation remained superficial, with topics ranging from recent travels to upcoming charity events. Clara did her best to engage, but she couldn't help feeling like an outsider looking in. Lily, however, proved to be the unexpected bridge. With her boundless energy and infectious laughter, she quickly charmed everyone at the table. She showed off her latest drawings, regaled them with stories about school, and even managed to coax a genuine smile from Alexander's usually stoic father. Watching her daughter interact so naturally with people who initially intimidated her gave Clara a renewed sense of confidence. If Lily could win them over, maybe she could too. The turning point came later that night, when Alexander led Clara outside for a walk along the lake. The air was cool and the moonlight shimmered across the water, creating a peaceful atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the tension earlier in the evening. As they strolled together, Alexander opened up about his own struggles growing up in such a privileged environment. "You think my life has always been perfect," he said, his tone reflective. "But the truth is, it's lonely at the top. Everyone wants something from you. Money, connections, favors. People smile to your face but talk behind your back. That's why your honesty means so much to me. You've shown me what it's like to be truly seen without pretense or agenda." Clara listened intently, realizing for the first time just how isolating wealth could be. In many ways, their experiences were mirror images of each other. She had spent years feeling invisible, while he had spent years feeling misunderstood. Their differences weren't barriers. They were opportunities to learn from one another. Over time, Clara began embracing her role in Alexander's life, not as someone trying to fit into his world, but as someone helping him rediscover its beauty. She introduced him to the simple joys she cherished, baking cookies with Lily, picnicking in the park, volunteering at local shelters. In return, Alexander taught her about resilience, patience, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. Their relationship wasn't without its challenges, of course. There were moments of doubt, arguments sparked by misunderstandings, and days when the weight of public scrutiny felt unbearable. But through it all, they leaned on each other, drawing strength from the bond they had forged in the quiet solitude of a hospital room. By the time autumn rolled around, Clara noticed subtle changes, not just in herself, but in those around her. Alexander's family, once wary of her presence, began warming up, inviting her and Lily to family gatherings and genuinely engaging with them. Her colleagues at the hospital, though still curious, started seeing her as more than just a tabloid headline. Even the media coverage shifted slightly, with some outlets highlighting the authenticity of their connection rather than fueling baseless rumors. Through it all, Clara held on to one unshakable truth. Love wasn't about erasing differences or conforming to societal expectations. It was about finding harmony amidst contrasts, celebrating the unique qualities that made each person who they were. And as she stood beside Alexander, watching the golden hues of sunset paint the sky, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as equals, partners, and friends. Months had passed since Alexander Hartwell's recovery, and life had settled into a rhythm that, while still challenging, felt more balanced. Clara and Alexander had weathered storms, both external and internal, and emerged stronger for it. Their relationship was no longer defined by the chaos of media scrutiny or societal expectations. Instead, it thrived on the foundation they had built together: honesty, trust, and an unwavering commitment to understanding each other. One crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves danced in the wind, Alexander surprised Clara with an invitation she hadn't anticipated. "There's something I want to show you," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. Intrigued, Clara agreed, bundling up Lily and climbing into the sleek black car waiting outside their modest apartment. The drive took them to a sprawling park on the outskirts of the city, where a grand tent had been set up under strings of fairy lights. Tables adorned with white linens, fresh flowers, and candles created an atmosphere both elegant and intimate. As they stepped out of the car, Clara realized this wasn't just any gathering. It was a charity gala, but not just any charity gala. It was one dedicated entirely to supporting single-parent families, a cause close to her heart. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the banner hanging above the entrance. Empowering families, transforming lives. Alexander turned to her, his expression soft but sincere. "This is your night, Clara," he said simply. "You've inspired me in ways I can't put into words. I wanted to do something that reflects the strength and resilience you embody every day." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she looked around at the scene before her. Hundreds of guests mingled beneath the glowing lights, many of whom were single parents themselves, eager to connect and share their stories. There were booths offering resources, from financial planning advice to parenting workshops and performances, by local artists whose work celebrated family bonds. It was clear that Alexander had poured his heart into organizing this event, ensuring it honored Clara's values and experiences. That evening, as they stood together on stage addressing the crowd, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Alexander, but for the journey that had brought them here. She spoke candidly about her struggles as a single mother, her fears, and her hopes for a future where no one felt alone in their hardships. When she finished speaking, the audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the park, like waves of encouragement. For Alexander, the gala marked a turning point as well. Over the months, he had come to understand the importance of using his wealth and influence for meaningful change. Inspired by Clara's dedication to helping others, he restructured parts of his company to prioritize employee well-being, implementing policies that supported working parents and fostered a culture of compassion. He also established a foundation aimed at providing scholarships and mentorship programs for children from low-income families, including Lily. Despite the progress they made individually, their relationship remained the cornerstone of their lives. They continued navigating the complexities of blending two vastly different worlds, learning from each other along the way. Clara taught Alexander the value of simplicity and humility, reminding him that true happiness came not from material possessions, but from human connection. In turn, Alexander showed Clara the power of perseverance and vision, encouraging her to dream bigger than she ever thought possible. Their love story wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when doubt crept in, when the weight of public opinion threatened to overshadow their bond. Yet, time and again, they chose to face these obstacles head-on, leaning on the trust and respect they had cultivated over the years. Whether it was dealing with intrusive paparazzi or navigating disagreements about how to balance their lives, they approached everything as a team. Lily, too, played a pivotal role in their journey. Her presence served as a constant reminder of why they fought so hard to make things work. She adored Alexander, calling him Uncle Alex until one day, shyly asking if she could call him Dad. The moment brought tears to both Clara and Alexander's eyes, solidifying the family dynamic they had unknowingly created. As winter approached, Clara found herself reflecting on how far they had come. From the quiet hospital room where she had whispered secrets to a comatose patient, to standing beside a billionaire who saw her not as a nurse or caregiver but as his equal, her life had transformed in ways she never imagined. Love, she realized, wasn't about perfection. It was about growth. It was about embracing imperfections, celebrating differences, and finding beauty in the unexpected. On Christmas Eve, As snow blanketed the city in a layer of pristine white, Alexander surprised Clara once more. They gathered around the fireplace in his penthouse, surrounded by twinkling lights and the scent of pine. Lily was fast asleep upstairs, clutching a stuffed animal Alexander had gifted her earlier that evening. As Clara sipped hot cocoa, Alexander knelt beside her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Clara," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "You've given me so much: hope, purpose, a reason to believe in second chances. I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Clara's face as she nodded, unable to form words. In that moment, she knew their love transcended titles, wealth, and circumstance. It was rooted in authenticity, nurtured by vulnerability, and strengthened by shared dreams. The following year brought new beginnings. Clara continued working as a nurse, using her platform to advocate for healthcare reforms and support initiatives for single-parent families. Alexander, meanwhile, expanded his philanthropic efforts, partnering with organizations dedicated to education, mental health awareness, and community development. Together, they proved that success wasn't measured by personal achievements, but by the positive impact one could have on others. Their wedding, held in the same park where the charity gala had taken place, was a celebration of love in its purest form. Friends, family, and strangers alike came together to witness the union of two souls who had defied odds and embraced life's unpredictability. As they exchanged vows beneath a canopy of flowers, Clara and Alexander locked eyes, silently promising to cherish not only the highs but also the lows, the laughter, the tears, and everything in between. Years later, when asked about their story, Clara would smile softly and say, "Love isn't about finding someone exactly like you. It's about finding someone who complements you, who challenges you to grow, and who sees the world through a lens different from your own." Sometimes the most extraordinary connections start in the simplest moments, like a whispered confession in a silent hospital room. And so their lives intertwined, two souls forever changed by the belief that love transcends boundaries, heals wounds, and creates possibilities where none seem to exist.